Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and welcome to the show, y'all. Look here. Chilli has heard everything that he needs to hear now. That fear that he's been feeling all these years, it's real. Because now he feels that his secret is out. See, the truth of the matter is this. See, when Chilli walked up on that scene in that hallway, he saw D-Money on the ground, being held down by one of the op, while the other one stabbed him. And he looked right at Chilli, begging him to help him. Begging him to help, screaming, help me, Chilli, help me. And Chilli was so frozen with fear that he backed out of that restroom. And he left his brother to die. And when he fell into the hallway, they proceeded to stab him. And when he got his bearings and got back up, they ran out past him. He knew who it was all these years. And he didn't dare say a word about it. Because he was afraid that if he would have said something, that the whole truth of the story would have came out. And if the whole truth comes out, then everybody would know that he's a coward. That he's afraid. Does that make him a coward? Because he was afraid. But his answer, his response to that was to retaliate. He was so angry, he was so afraid that his response was to join the very organization that he didn't never want to join and then commit a crime that would put him in prison for the next 40 years of his life because he didn't want anybody to know that he was not that person. He became everything that he wasn't. And you know how they say what's in the dark will always come to the light? Well, the light is on bright right now. It's shining bright because now everybody's asking the question, who is he talking about? What are they talking about? So now in the penitentiary, see, one of the things that happens in here when people get to trying to find out what's going on with you, they want to see some paperwork now. So everybody's talking to the op and the people in charge of him. They're asking, who are you talking about? Who is this person, this and that? And see, he's in a different headspace. And he's talking to Pastor T. And Pastor T is telling him it's not necessary. Because Pastor T knows where this is headed. He said it's not important that you know exactly who that is other than what you admitted to, what you cleansing yourself of, so now you can move forward in peace. But see, because you own peace and you trying to do the right thing, that don't mean everybody else is. His own brothers want to know what he did because they're hearing the whisperings from the brothers on the other side of this. And then Chilli's brothers, they want to know, who are you talking about? Who walked out? Who left their brother to die? Who did that? And everybody's suspecting Chilli because they can't think of any other situation that's similar to what he said. Now, he left out some details. Maybe he did that, because it's been a long time. But the fact that he left out details is what's buying Chilli time right now. He didn't tell him it was in a club. That would have been key. That would have probably been the nail in Chilli's coffin. Now, Chilli's got a choice to make. And he doesn't know what to do. He knows that the guy is talking about him. He knows that the organization wants to know if he left D-Money to die, a gangster. See, you got to keep in mind, Chilli was a peon at the time. And he left a gangster to die. And he joined just to cover it all up. See, that's what the org is thinking. They don't care nothing about him putting in work. See, let me tell you something. Remember this. Your love that you get when you're a part of an organization is based on the performance that you provide them, what you do for them. The second that it ain't good enough, you ain't good enough. And when it becomes not good enough, you in trouble. And right now, Chilli was in trouble. And he's trying to figure out what to do. What's his next move? What am I going to do? So he goes and he talks to the opposition. And they're in the same unit, and they're sitting at the table and they're talking. And the op, he understands the situation that he's put Chilli in. But this was his truth. This was his story. And he had to get his story out the way it happened. He don't want to be dragged into the darkness. He wants to be free. He wants to be free of it all. And he's telling Chilli that the best thing for him to do is to own up to it so he can be free. And he tells him, and Chilli tells him, if I do that, they gonna kill me. They gonna kill me. He was that afraid. And the reality is, they would have. If he tells them that they're gonna do it, they're gonna do it to him. So he calls and talks to his parents, and he tells his parents to come visit him that weekend because it's something that he needs to tell them. See, he didn't tell anybody what happened. He's been carrying this load, this burden for years now. And when we get afraid, you know what we do? We run back to mama or daddy or granny. We run back to them, and we want them to help us. So he called and told his parents to come visit him. And they knew what had happened. Because D-Money's parents had been told by the DA that these two individuals had admitted to having something to do with that. And they had let them plead guilty to a lesser charge. So they knew that Chilli had seen who did it, but didn't say anything. But what they didn't know is that D-Money was alive, begging him to help him, and he couldn't. He was frozen, paralyzed with fear, and he just backed away and watched his friend die. And he wanted to tell his mom and dad because he wanted them to help him. He needed a way out. So when they came to visit him that weekend, they were all in the VG talking, and as they were talking, he broke down several times and started crying before he could actually get it out. And Pastor T, he walks around in the VG introducing himself, to family members and letting them know if they ever need anybody to talk to, he was there for them, right? So when he walked over to the table and he saw Chilli crying, talking to his mother and father, he asked could he be of any assistance. And when they got all sit down and they held hands and prayed, and Pastor T, he told him, he said, look, whatever it is, we're finna get through this together. So that's when Chilli started to tell him the story and started to fill in the blanks for him from what happened the other night in the chapel. And Pastor T, he sat there. See, he's seen it all. He's been there, done that. And this wasn't the first time that he had heard a story about a young person that was so afraid that he couldn't do anything. He couldn't be of assistance to his friend. This wasn't new to him. In this lifestyle, that gang lifestyle, listen to me, y'all, it ain't what you think. It ain't what you think at all, because a lot of times people will say that they're going to do certain things that they can't do it because that's not who they are. And then they'll try everything to make it seem that that's who they are. Look what Chilli did. He joined the gang to retaliate for something that he could have prevented. It's not who he is. So as he tells the story, Pastor T tells me, he said, before I answer you, he said, let's pray. And they all put their heads down and they prayed. And when they finished, Pastor T told them, he said, look, you got to walk away from this. He said, yeah, it's going to be hard. But see, that's the price you pay. When you get in this lifestyle, that leave this lifestyle, it's going to cost you a pound of flesh. A pound of flesh. And it's going to hurt. But what's the alternative? What was his alternative? To stay? Stay and risk one day somebody putting the dots together or running straight into it and telling them what it was that he did and why he did it and whatever they decide to do to him, accepting it. Because he made the choices to live that life. So when he told his parents that he was going to go ahead and he was going to tell the leadership what he had done, they were terrified for him. And they asked the pastor, is there any other way? And the pastor told him, he said, look, as a pastor, I'm not going to tell him to put himself in harm's way. But I know this lifestyle. I lived it. And if you want to make a clean break from it, you got to rip the Band-Aid off. He said, but we'll be watching and we'll be there with you. And if it gets too bad, we're going to step in. So see, Pastor T, he went off and he let the captain know what was going on. And the captain was frantic. He was like, what are you doing? He said, we cannot allow this to happen. They'll kill that boy. And Pastor T said, we'll be close by to stop it. But I'm talking about this man's soul. He said, we got to do more than just be concerned about the prison running. And the captain told him he was insane and he wouldn't allow it. So the captain, he bumped down on Chilli and he told him, he said, look, what you're planning to do, you better not do. Chilli pretended that he didn't know what he was talking about. Because he was still the captain. Can't talk to the captain. So Chilli ended up, he got a sit down with the leadership and he told them, he said, man, I did some things I'm not proud of. I'm not proud of it all. And he said, it's been haunting me for years. And before he could even finish it, one of the POAs said, so it's you. It's you that walked off on our brother and let our brother die. And Chilli told him, it's me. And they looked at him and they told him, he said, look, you know what that means. He said, I do. He said, but you need to know the whole story. And one of the POAs told him, I don't need to know the whole story. What I need to know is that why you a coward, why you walked off on, and why you ain't tell us. He said, I didn't tell you because I didn't want to end up like this. I know what this means. I know what's going to happen to me. But I got to come in here and I got to tell you now. And then the POAs looked at him. He said, the only reason you in here telling us now is because we know what's going on. But there was this other brother that was sitting in the back of the room. He wasn't saying a word. He was just listening. And he was the top dog. Boss of bosses, as they say. And he kept listening while the other POAs was grilling him, putting him through hell. And after they finished talking, he stood up and he walked to the middle of the room. And he told Chilli to get up and come to him. Chilli got up, his legs was wobbling when he walked over to him. And by the time he got over to him, you could see the sweat visibly running down his shirt. And he was nervous, his legs were shaking. He had seen this before. He had seen this before. Young brothers thinking that they can live this life and step into this lane, into this arena, and thinking they understand what it's like and what it means to be a gangster. He knew what this was like. And when he looked at Chilli, he saw his own son. And he told him in that raspy voice, he said, I understand what you're talking about. I understand what you've been through. But it's a price to pay for that. One of ours is dead because you didn't do what you were supposed to do as a friend, not as a gangster. He said, as a friend. He said, and I don't see you as a coward. I don't see you as a coward. He said, I don't know what a lot of people would have done the first time they saw something like that. He said, everybody likes to talk that they would do this and do that, but I don't know if they would or not. But after you've been in this, as long as I have, is after you done dedicated your life to this like I have, then you become hardened. You become that person that's capable of doing that, stepping into the fire no matter what. It doesn't happen overnight. And he said, you want that guy. He said, but what I'm going to give you props for is that you wanted to do something about it. And it cost you. It cost you 40 years of your life. He said, but we got to do something to you about this. We're not going to let this go. He said, but I ain't going to kill you. I ain't going to kill you. But you got to pay for this. And he walked back to the corner, and he sit down in the corner, didn't say another word. And then the other POAs, they told Chilli to step out and stand outside, wait until they called him back in. So Chilli, he stepped outside. He nervous. I'm talking about he nervous. He's sweating, y'all. And they sat in there and they talked and they talked and they talked and they kept going back and forth. And you can hear their voices getting loud. Some saying yeah, some saying no, that ain't enough. He need to die. Everybody's saying what they want to say. And then the boss of bosses, he speaks up and he said, this is what it's going to be. This is what it's going to be. We're going to put him in the rack. We're going to beat him. And we're going to strip him. Then we're going to run him off the compound. And he'll never be able to set his foot on another compound as long as he's in the penitentiary. But when he leaves prison, his debt is paid. His debt is paid. Because the sacrifices that he's made, that should count for something. That should count for something. So they sat there and they listened to the boss of bosses talk, and some of them disagreed, and he gave them that look, and they quickly changed it because he had all the juice and the experience that's necessary to make decisions like this. And as he told them all to get out of the room, he told Chilli to step back in. And he told them what his punishment was going to be. And Chilli listened to him. He sat there on the stand and listened to him. And while he was listening to him, his whole body was shaking. I'm talking about his whole body was shaking. And he couldn't talk. His throat was so swollen, he couldn't even get the words out of his mouth. But tears were running down his face. And the boss of bosses, he looked at him and he wanted to embrace him because he saw his son. But he couldn't do that. He couldn't do that. And he told him, when you walk out of here, you'll never see me again, and we'll never speak again. He said, but that time you got, that's punishment enough. The decisions that you made, that's punishment enough. He said, I don't want you to be like me. And he told him he'll never be getting out. He said, I'll never get out of prison because of the choices that I made. I'll never get out of prison. He said, I got more time than anybody in this prison, and I'll never get out. So my life is sealed, and yours don't have to be. He said, you'll be old when you get out, but you'll still have life, and you need to be able to live. And he said, one day you're going to appreciate what I'm doing for you by sending you to the back, because there's no way that you can make it on the compound after what you've done. And you got to go to the back. So Chilli, he stood up and he said, thank you, but the words came out. It was all broken because his throat was so swollen from the fear and the anxiety of what was being said to him. He couldn't get the words out right. And he walked out of the room hanging his head down. And as he walked past the other POAs, they told him to make sure he'd be at the room at 6 o'clock that night to get his violation. And make sure he had all his stuff packed and ready to go, because immediately after that, he was leaving. He was going to the back. So Chilli, he left and he went and talked to Pastor T, and he told Pastor T what had been decided. And Pastor T looked at him and he said, you don't have to go to that room. You can leave right now and go to the back. I'll just call the captain and it'll be over with. But Chilli looked at Pastor T. He said, I can't. I got to do this. He said, I'm not running anymore. I can't run again. So that night, at 6 o'clock, he went to the room. He accepted his violation, and they beat him. And they beat him. And they beat him. And then they threw him out of the room. And as he crawled to his feet, he made his way back to the unit, got his stuff, walked up to the captain's shack, bleeding, with all his property in the buggy, and told him that he wanted to check in. The captain was already aware of what was going down and what could happen, and so he already had a cell ready in case it really went down. And they took him to the back. And when they took him to the back, he just lay in the bed without even getting in the shower, and he just cried and cried and cried. And if you want to know what happened after he got in the back, you're going to have to tune in to the next episode. It's been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all. I'm getting so